Our Sunday strategy session is here to dig into Canada's response. Kathleen Monk is a former NDP strategist and director of communications to the late Jack Layton. Lisa Raitt is former conservative deputy leader and vice chair and managing director of global investment banking at CIBC. And Scott Reid is a CTV News political analyst and former communications director to Prime Minister Paul Martin. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for making time for this discussion. Scott, I wanted to start with you and ask you to weigh in on the gravity of the last 24 hours.
I don't know that there's a precedent for it. This is an act of war, economic war, trade war that President Trump has unleashed on Canada. And it's the gravest breach of the friendship and partnership between Canada and the United States, I think quite literally in the history of our relationship. I thought the Prime Minister, who's taken, a lot of abuse on this panel and from others over the course of the past couple of years, was magnificent last night. I thought his tone was perfect, reminding Americans and the American administration of that longstanding partnership, highlighting what an absolutely egregious act this is, and outlining how we're forced to respond. But this is a terrible situation. Our response is going to almost certainly cause Trump to respond again. There will be an escalation as early as this week. And, the reality is that we're dealing with the sort of narcissist who thinks that us responding to his aggression is an act of aggression on our part, and he's the wounded party. So it's not clear how long this will last. It's not clear how we get out of this. But this is an act of war, and we could be France and get rolled over, or we can be Britain and fight back. And I don't think there's any mistaking that the mood in the country is shifting rapidly toward fight back.
Lisa, on Scott's point of, when or how we get out of this, it's so complicated by the fact that we are not really sure even what this is about. Though the executive order cites the border, we know that the data doesn't necessarily back up to any degree the way in which President Trump is characterizing it. But we also know that the president talks about the utility of tariffs, the beauty of them, in his words, quite frequently. How difficult does that make it for all levels of government to navigate this moving forward?
Well, the beauty of the tariff is actually completely inconsequential to what he's actually done. So he had to declare a national emergency with respect to the border in order to be able to put these tariffs in place. And that's going to have to stand, and that's going to have to withstand the Congress overview that is eventually going to have to happen with respect to these measures. Now, I think that the response of the Prime Minister, while was on one footing with respect to we're going to fight this and we're going to have a retaliatory tariff on it, it is incomplete because there are other things that have to happen as well. You may wonder why Doug Ford's down there talking to Americans, why you have Danielle Smith lobbying down there as well. And it's because Congress has a role to play here. Congress can introduce a motion that can overturn this emergency power that the president has put in place. So continuously talking to Americans and talking to Congress people and talking to senators is exactly what you should be doing. And I would say that as well, Canadian Parliament has to put a very big sign in the window that they're not going to put up with this, and they're going to meet this on a legislative basis, not just in terms of making executive orders like we are here in terms of retaliatory tariffs, but on a legislative basis as well. We have to indicate that this is unacceptable because essentially, the wording that Scott used is exactly correct. This has been a declaration or an admission that there's a war between Canada and the United States with respect to problems at the border. And that's why these economic sanctions have been placed on Canada and Mexico.
Let's unpack a little bit of that, Kathleen, in particular with respect to what happens next. Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, last night saying he's tried to get in touch with Donald Trump since inauguration to no avail. There has been lobbying, as Lisa points out, at the provincial level and the federal level of members of Congress and other levels of government, particularly at the state level. Again, to no avail. The silence has been almost deafening. Do you think that changes from here on out?
Well, hopefully. I'm sure that our politicians hope it changes in terms of those communication channels being open. But listen, Trump only was inaugurated just like under 2 weeks ago. They're still getting their government up and running. I think that the plan that was rolled out by the federal government last night with the retaliation of tariffs was stronger than what the government initially had proposed. And the fact that they've had that unity, not only with the premiers, the first ministers across the country, but also with corporate candidates Canada, with labor leaders, to actually go as hard as they did last night in terms of putting that 25% tariff on U.S. goods. In terms of, I think it's 155 billion, as you said, Vashi. It's significant, and I think that unity that we're seeing across Canada, across not only labor but business communities, political actors, is really important, because the fight we have ahead is a huge one. Listen, I was talking to some folks who were up in Sault Ste. Marie last night. Workers there at places like Tenaris or Algoma Steel, they're worried. They're worried about their jobs. They're worried about their homes and their livelihood. Some are actually thinking of selling their homes right now because the damage that this threat that Trump has already put on Canada, whether it's overturned or not, as Lisa says, has already created some damage in our economy. And we have to start learning the lessons, whether it's COVID pandemic or whether it's the financial crisis of 2008. Canada needs to shock-proof our economy by doing more of the domestic refining, the value chain, not just exporting our raw resources, whether it's, trees or critical minerals or potash. We need to build our economy domestically here, and we need to have the unity that we're seeing, at least last night, and hopefully in the weeks to come, for Canadians to get the job done.
I've just got about 3 minutes left, so I want to get one comment from each of you, rather. Scott, what in your view comes next?
Probably an escalation of the tariffs above 25% on the part of Trump, because he'll react to our reaction. And then I think there's a big question mark, and that is, what is the reaction of others? What is the reaction of Congress, of governors who know that this is a bad idea, who know that this will be affected? My view is Donald Trump has bullied and broken those people, that they are afraid of him, that they will not stand up to him, they will not tell him he's wrong. And I also wonder about the response of business here in Canada. Will we see Trump rewarded? And people shrug their shoulders and say, well, the only way to manage this is to locate our manufacturing and our businesses in the United States to get on the other side of that tariff wall. And I hope to hell that our government finds ways to incentivize those businesses to not make that decision. Because if we reward Donald Trump and show him that this is paying off economically, we will get more of it, and those tariffs will not be lifted.
How much of a worry is that from where you sit, Lisa?
Very much so. I agree with everything Scott says. I think as well, though, the government has to focus on the exactly precise issue here, and that is the fact that the president has declared a national emergency. Congress has to overturn that this is a national emergency with respect to the border. One of the ways in which Parliament here in Canada can show that they're working on making sure that this is a national emergency for the Americans is by coming back to Parliament, by sitting, by passing laws, by discussing this. And I know that the Prime Minister says he has all the tools that he needs to deal with it. That's actually not true. He needs to have the legislative powers as well to be able to show Congress that Canadian Parliament's treating this as an emergency, has recalled Parliament, and is passing laws to ensure that the security of that border meets a test set by the Americans.
Okay, but Lisa,
yeah, very quickly, Scott, and then I want to get Kathleen. I have literally a minute left. Go ahead, Scott.
Well, what practical chance is that Congress is going to stand up to Trump now? Their spines are broken, and their mood and their temper is melted by this guy. So I think.
Sure, but Scott, this is law. This is a court case now. We're in the court of law. You have to put your best case forward, and we're not.
I'll split the difference. Kathleen, last word is yours.
Well, I guess just on that last point, the question is, are we, isn't this actually Trump's objective? Is to sow disorder, to actually challenge the international trade system? And he's almost imperialist in his thoughts and what he's doing in terms of Greenland, Panama, expansionist. I think that we actually, we really need to be careful with who we're dealing with. And in terms of bringing it back to Canada and strategies here, we need to be able to support our workers, sustain manufacturing in our country. That means supports for businesses, bridges, whatever it needs to keep Canada going in the next few months.
Okay, I've got to leave it there. Scott Reed, Lisa Raitt, and Kathleen Monk, thank you so much to our Sunday strategy session.